Hey there, welcome back. I am here with a new friend of mine, someone who I interviewed recently and have, after interviewing her, enormous respect for her knowledge. And I'm super excited to be interviewing her again for this summit. Her name is Dr. Rajka Galbraith, and she's been practicing medicine for over 22 years. She's certified by the Institute of Functional Medicine in Functional Medicine, the American Board of Family Medicine, and the American Board of Integrative and Holistic Medicine. She's passionate about empowering women to optimal health and in turn having them become ambassadors to empower their families and others. It's her personal mission to spread the word that disease prevention and cure are possible. She has a particular interest in nutrigenetics, although puts the focus on epigenetics first. She herself battled many avoidable symptoms. I was going to say unavoidable, but there are many avoidable symptoms and disease, and would like to put an end to this for our future generations. She's an international speaker, wife, mother of two, and avid yogi who loves the arts and travel. Her private practice, Simply Health Institute, is located outside of Chicago, Illinois. And in this presentation, she's going to be talking about optimizing nutrigenetics for detox, for hormonal optimization, and executive function, all with the central goal of superhuman energy. I'm super excited to get into this. She is a wealth of knowledge. So welcome. Such a pleasure to connect with you again. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm super excited because I am passionate about the nutrigenetics. And like I said, the emphasis is on the genetics, but you'll see as we get through the talk why it's so important to know it backwards and forwards. So you can pretty much reverse engineer it if you don't know it, but you're always going to focus on the diet and lifestyle first and foremost. So have an action-packed talk ready for you.
Wonderful. Let's do it.
Like most functional medicine practitioners, I had my own healthcare journey. And as a child, I had many dreams. I had a dream to become a doctor, a dream to get married and have children, and a dream to not only cure just about everyone, but to have my own business and practice. And sadly, throughout my journey, almost all of these were not ever materialized. So that's why I devote a substantial amount of time so that everyone can achieve their dreams and no one has to go through what I have. The picture, ironically, is of me and attending my first delivery, and that was at my parents' farm in Serbia, and it was a delivery of a calf. And I went on to become a family doctor who did deliver babies, but then soon found the limitations, not only for my own health, but for many of my patients. So, like any good academician, for the objectives today, I'm going to review epigenetics versus genetics, review some key concepts, and then we'll dive into the three sections, the genetics of the key detox genes, and we could easily do 10 hours on detox alone, but we'll do some of the ones that keep coming up time and time again for the patients I see. I'll do a little case to highlight the interplay of these genes with what it means to be superhuman and or preventing disease. And then we'll segue into genes responsible for hormonal metabolism, as well as go over cases. And along the way, I'll insert ways to support these genes as well as test laboratory studies that can test for the substrates that they're responsible for producing. And then lastly, we'll go on to the gene for executive function, which really will help to make us a superhuman. And if there's time, I have a case at the end I'd love to highlight that will wrap it all together.
Beautiful. Sounds great.
And then moving onward, so epigenetics and genetics, basically, what does that mean? Epigenetics is having your diet and lifestyle be able to modulate the expression of any gene. And the genetics is, what does that gene show? Genotype is what we see when we test, and it can show us a mutation, but the phenotype tells us whether that mutation is actually expressing. And the key study that really hallmarks this nicely is the agouti mouse model. And so they took two mice. One mouse was not predisposed to being obese, and that is noted in the picture here of having a lighter color coat, and they fed it a terrible diet and it became obese. And then they took another mouse who had obese parents and gave it a nutrient-rich diet and methylation support, and that mouse did not become obese. So that's the power of our diet and lifestyle and gentle supplementation support. Now, there are other key things to really understand, and I'm not here to make you all an expert, but the gene is typically named for the enzyme it controls. And what happens is that usually it's a conversion of substance A to substance B, which requires that enzyme, and then cofactors. All I'm saying with cofactors is any vitamins and minerals that might be necessary. And that's where Nutrigenetics comes in, where we can modulate by giving those vitamins and minerals that will support that conversion, and or you can even give the N substrate, so giving substance B if it's available. And again, to review, genotype tells us that gene is mutated. Phenotype tells us if that mutation is actually expressing. So a person can either have no mutation. So most genes have two copies, one from mom, one from dad. So no mutations is usually minus minus. Some people in our field do not like that, but that's called the wild type. It means it's there's no mutations noted. Now, heterozygous means there's one of the copies of the two copies is mutated, and the gene can function a little less well, up to 20 to 30% less than it should. And homozygous means that both genes are mutated, and you can see up to 60 to 70% less functioning of the enzyme. And like I said, typically there are two copies of a gene, but sometimes there can be less, and we call that copy number variance. And why I bring this up is that certain testing companies, and not to poo-poo 23andMe, they used to have a robust panel. I know they've pared it down a little bit, is they do not pick up copy number variance. And I saw that with myself as well. And again, we had already highlighted the epigenetics, so we won't go over that again, but basically saying a healthy diet and lifestyle can turn off a mutated gene. And then conversely, an unhealthy diet and lifestyle can cause a normal gene to express as if it's mutated. And another key concept is we typically don't just treat gene mutations, but we really focus on the epigenetics. But conversely, what I've learned over time is if someone's chronically ill, there is a really strong chance that that gene mutation is actually expressing, or that there's phenotypic expression. So what I do in my practice is I look at combining the clinical history, what symptoms and disease processes are going on with the genetics and with any labs. How does that sound? Is that pretty clear?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, we're going to segue into those key detox genes. Like I said, there are so many, and we could spend hours just talking about detoxification because there's many different pathways, but I'm going to focus on just three pathways. The first is SOD, or superoxide dismutase, and we'll get to each one of these more in depth as we go along. PON1, which is also known as serum paraoxynase aryl esterase 1, quite a mouthful. And then the three key glutathione genes, which I'll go through in each section. So we'll kick off the detox by talking about superoxide dismutase. And so it's involved in detoxifying free radicals. Those are also known as our reactive oxygen species. And one of the main free radicals is called superoxide. I'm going to show you a super cool pathway. It's one of my nerdy pathways I love to share. And think of it as when we cut open an apple, and when that apple oxidizes with air, that's what oxidative stress is. So it's the browning or destruction of the apple. So can you imagine if you have an excess of that going on in the body, you can have a browning or damage or destruction of the body. Think about osteoarthritis, any of the pain syndromes, any of the neurodegenerative diseases, dementia, MS, etc. So that's where it's really super important to kind of understand. And we're going to go through ways to decrease this oxidative stress. But let's talk about the pathway. Now, I know this pathway looks very busy, so I'm going to have the listeners focus in on the green. And far left, there's a superoxide anion. So superoxide, remember, is our main free radical that gets neutralized by superoxide dismutase. That's the SOD gene, and it turns it into hydrogen peroxide. But we can't just leave it there as hydrogen peroxide, because if you have an accumulation, sometimes what you may see is reflux from an early young age, or premature graying of the hair. So you want to convert that. You need to further neutralize that. And that can be done one of two ways. So going on from hydrogen peroxide to the right of the pathway, there's an enzyme called catalase that'll break it down to water and oxygen, so it neutralizes it. Or going down below hydrogen peroxide in the green box, utilizing glutathione, it'll break it down into water. So that's pretty neutral. So what happens if there's an overaccumulation of free radicals or oxidative stress? And again, we're going to talk about what causes that in a minute here. Or if that gene doesn't function like it should. So superoxide will be hanging around. If there's enough of it, it can combine with something called nitric oxide and then form something called peroxynitrite. And that's what's damaging to our tissues. And what you'll see is lipid peroxidation, and that's something we can actually measure, or protein nitration. So to summarize, if you don't neutralize your free radicals, the main one being superoxide, it can linger around and combine and form peroxynitrite, which is damaging to our tissue and even can be damaging to our DNA. So we need not only the SOD enzyme, but as I've highlighted in this pathway, glutathione, which we'll get to, and catalase.
So basically for people listening who don't have the visual aid of this, basically there are specific molecules that are sources of oxidative stress at the cellular level. And I'm oversimplifying here, but superoxide dismutase and glutathione are incredibly important to neutralize or prevent the buildup of too many of those oxidative molecules.
That's correct. So you do need them present. And then you also want to be able to regulate how much oxidative stress your body is undergoing. And I'm going to list all the causes so people can be mindful and cognizant of that as well. And then people will ask, is there a way to actually measure oxidation? And there are several laboratories that will measure it. You can measure it in the urine or blood and urine. And one of the companies I look at does measure lipid peroxidases. And if they're elevated, then you're worried, well, there's enough oxidative stress going on that it can cause tissue destruction. So you want to look at where are the sources, remove the sources, and then support that person's genetics and support the nutrients that will help them detoxify.
Rajka, quick question. Do you know if there's any research linking these markers of oxidative stress, like lipid peroxides and the, I forget the full extension of this one, but it's 8-OHDG. Do you know, I'm just out of curiosity, what's the full chemical name of that? I totally forgot.
Hydroxydeoxyguanosine.
Nice. Do you know if there's any actual data linking clinical endpoints, disease states, or symptoms to those specific measurements, or are they just sort of I mean, I know that there's research saying that these are accurate measures of oxidative stress, but I'm just curious if they've been actually, higher levels have been linked to certain disease states.
No, you pull out a good question. And in one instance, so I recently did research on bladder cancer, and there's a link when there's higher lipid peroxides. It is associated with bladder cancer. I only know that. So in that instance, I've specifically researched myself because I have a patient who made it to 88 years old, just shy of 89, and had no issues except for bladder cancer. And so for him, we want to remove that oxidative stressor. And for that particular individual, it was the exposure to the toxins in his city water supply. And so I'm going to measure that periodically to make sure that it's controlled. So in that one study. So I don't have all the studies, but clinically what I see, so I always say a good clinician looks at the data and definitely practices evidence-based, but you combine it with what you see clinically. As the numbers go down, people do have lessening of symptoms as well. So in bladder cancer, it's definitely related and correlated.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, great question. So how do I reduce oxidative stress in my patients? And I eliminate inflammation. And I have my patients remember that, and I teach it by the word stains, S-T-A-I-N-S. So it's like a stains in your laundry. And the first S is actually for sleep, stress, spirituality. So if you're not sleeping, if you're stressed out, not modulating stress, a lack of purpose is what I mean by spirituality. It can make you inflamed. The T is for toxins, and I'd refer to that gentleman who had bladder cancer, and he had high levels of toxins in his city water. And so it's any toxin. So it's the food we found in the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the products we put on our skin, and even our cleaning products in our home, kind of in a nutshell. And then in rarer cases, you can, not rarer, but in other cases, you can even have mycotoxins, which is toxicity from mold illness. Then we look at the A stands for adverse foods. So those are just inflammatory foods, and top two inflammatory foods still tend to be gluten and dairy, but there are many others that are inflammatory, depending on what your genetic makeup is. And then I look at infections. So people who have an imbalance of good to bad bacteria in their bellies, people who have been exposed to even Epstein-Barr. It's not so much the infection, it's usually the immune system not allowing you to clear it. Even Lyme disease. So if you can regulate that immune system, if you can create balance in our microbiome, which is all the bacteria in our large intestine, you can decrease inflammation, and you can become inflamed strictly from having nutrient deficiencies. And there's so many, with vitamin D, almost 100% present in the population, or excess being sugar, additives, preservatives, MSG, all the chemicals that shouldn't be in our food, and then being sedentary or solitary. And so unfortunately, a lot of us have been solitary over the last little while. So all these things can cause inflammation, and if you eliminate them systematically, you can decrease that oxidative stress load on the body. One last thing I'll highlight with free radicals is that they're not all bad. So we do produce free radicals when we make energy, or ATP. So it's a natural byproduct, and a small amount of free radicals are necessary to combat those infections. So to kill the pathogens, bacteria, viruses, yeast we may encounter. But it's when that balance becomes excessive that it's a problem. So that's kind of why SOD is important. And the next one I see in patients who have illnesses, in a way to keep us being superhuman, is that PON1. And what PON1 does is it breaks down organophosphates. And what that fancy term is, just insecticides and herbicides that are commonly seen and used in foods that are grown and sold to us, particularly the non-organic foods. And unfortunately, if you have a mutation in PON1, even if it's not expressing, it does make you more susceptible to neurotoxic damage from these organophosphates. And ironically, there are labs that will measure organophosphates in patients. There is a company, Great Plains Lab, that measures them in patients. I hope I can say that on this, because
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Great Plains Lab, and it's one I've been following. When I had a patient whose symptoms were resistant, I said we have to leave no stone unturned. So she wasn't responding as quick as I like. And so I actually recently had mine measured, and if our viewers could see my test results, what they would note is that of the 4 markers for organophosphates, so I have 2 for insecticides and 2 for pesticides. 2 of mine were non-detectable, and 2 were in a very, very low range. And that's because we eat organically. And I've made a commitment to that because I want to be as superhuman as possible. So
do they also test for glyphosate?
They do. And unfortunately, we had ours tested, and our children are in the lower ranges. But by virtue of just being on this planet for a long time, my husband and I were kind of at that 75th percentile, although we eat organic. So that was a bit shocking. And so we're putting in place other measures to continue to eliminate that. So
I wonder if it's just a geographic issue. Being in Chicago, Illinois, there's probably a lot of non-organic farming around that whole area.
Yes, that is a huge concern of mine, is that the non-organic or inorganic farming you're getting cross-contamination into your organic farms. So yeah, it's unfortunate. So what can our listeners do if they didn't want to test? Well, if what they found is that if you eat 7 days of eating organic will decrease your excretion of these organic phosphates by 90%. So you're really going to decrease the level that are found. So it doesn't take very long, but you want to sustain it at that level. And there are actually some supplements that you can utilize that are beneficial as well. So zinc and lycopene, and think of any of the antioxidants, vitamin E, vitamin C, particularly when they combined E with selenium and when they combined E with curcumin or turmeric. So, but in all reality, because it will excrete naturally on their own quite nicely when you reduce the exposure, you probably don't have to supplement in this instance. Now, the last of the 3 detox genes is glutathione, and it's considered the mother of antioxidants. And remember, antioxidant inhibit oxidation, or they inhibit the browning of the apple, or the browning of our tissue, so to speak. And there are three main genes, and I'll say them kind of slowly. It's not important to know them, but there is one distinct piece that is important to know. So there's one of the genes is GSTT1. So GS is glutathione synthase transferase, and there's GSTM1 and GSTP1. So there's just three main ones. So you don't have to remember the letters, but for two of them, for the two that are not GSTP1, so the T1 and M1, you can have 0 copies of that gene. So that puts you at risk of being able to detoxify from things you're exposed to. And for the M1, you can also have 0 copies of the gene as well. So if you have significant mutations throughout all three, then you really want to limit your exposure to toxins. You really want to support detoxification. You want to live as healthy as you can. And let's summarize. What does this term detox even mean? And, am I talking about one of those fad diets? So anytime you're exposed to anything, so a medication, pollution, so some of the chemicals found in our cleaning products or in our skincare products, so things like phthalates and BPA, your body has to break it down. And it typically breaks it down in 2 phases. The first phase we call phase 1, and you actually break it down, you put it into this intermediate phase that toxin then becomes actually more actively and more active metabolite. So it could be even more damaging. So the most important part is phase 2, or creating or adding a water molecule to that active metabolite so you can then excrete it. What excrete it means, it's not very glamorous. Pee, poop, or sweat it out. And in phase 2, it's heavily reliant on all 3 of those glutathione genes. So could you imagine if you're exposed to something and you break it down, you make it more toxic for your body, but then you don't have adequate glutathione and you can't excrete it. So it could be quite damaging to our tissue. And so it detoxifies a lot of things, biotics. And so those are chemicals that act like estrogen, carcinogens, as I mentioned, drugs or medications, many of our free radicals. So remember, it's a step after SOD. So SOD will neutralize the free radical, but then you have to take that hydrogen peroxide and further break it down to water, which is neutral. And one of the glutathione genes is particularly important for mercury detoxification. And people who eat inorganic or farmed fish can have exposure to mercury, and those who've had mercury fillings. And then one of the glutathione genes is really important for estrogen metabolism. So kind of to summarize, we've looked at, actually I have one more point to make on glutathione. You can actually measure it. So you can go through a conventional lab. Conventional labs are going to measure it in the red blood cells. So you get a couple week average, but you can even go to specialty labs like SpectraCell or Vibrant and or even Genova, and get a level of glutathione and see, is it in the optimal range, average, or suboptimal, and then how there will be ways that you can support that we're going to review. You can also look at it through Great Plains Lab does a urine test that looks at an indirect marker for glutathione. So the ones I mentioned before were red blood cell through a conventional lab like Quest or LabCorp, or directly measuring it through one of these specialty companies like Genova, or SpectraCell. But a Great Plains Lab just does an inverse marker for some reason, and it looks at a measure for something called pyroglutamic acid. And if that number is elevated, it usually signifies a deficiency in glutathione. So ways to increase it are your sulfur-rich foods, garlic and onion, your cruciferous vegetables, taking in whey protein. I put a little thing that some people, of course, have dairy intolerances. N-acetylcysteine is huge, supporting methylation, and that's your active B vitamins like B12 and folate, and even other antioxidants, selenium, vitamin E and C, exercise. And sometimes you'd have to actually supplement, and we'll go through that. So let's kind of put this together in a case. So I had a woman who came to me, 40 years old, and she thought she was coming to me for a genetics consultation about MTHFR. She was having recurrent miscarriages and undergoing IVF, and she wanted to optimize MTHFR. And it's, as you know, Ari, it's more than just MTHFR. I mean, that got a lot of buzz in the media, but it's so much more.
There was a time there where everybody was saying, oh, I have this symptom and that symptom and all these different problems, and it's because I'm MTHFR, and there was a lot of very myopic reductionist thinking around that specific variant.
Yeah. And so she came in, and unfortunately there's about a month delay between the booking and the appointment. She saw me and she got diagnosed with acute rheumatoid arthritis. Boom, out of the blue. So we took her through our program, and, we optimized all those levels of inflammation. I have a 6-step process, and it does focus on eliminating all those things that I talked about in stain, sleep and stress, and foods and infections and nutrients, and, exercise, and even the spirituality. There were some things that came up, and she was seen and given a protocol to follow for 3 months. So she was kind of an unusual case. She was an international patient that flew in, and we gave her multiple steps. And I lost her to follow-up, and I thought, oh boy, maybe she didn't get better, or what happened? I wonder if she ended up on meds. And then 18 months later, to the date, she came back to me for another consultation. And this time she really wanted to look at not just MTHFR, but her whole genetics. And I said, boy, I was really worried about you. What happened? She goes, oh, I feel like I've never had rheumatoid arthritis. So that's how astounding. So remember, I took her from significant symptoms to complete resolution, not knowing her genetics, just MTHFR, which I didn't even focus on that. And then we looked at her genetic mutations retrospectively. And besides the MTHFR, she had a homozygous. That means 2 of her SOD genes were mutated. And it explained why when I gave her SOD, it actually did help alleviate her pain as we brought her back into balance. And then she had PON1 that was also doubly mutated, or homozygous. And it explains why one of the final steps was we had her undergo a detox. And this led to, after all the multiple steps, it was not one thing, to complete resolution of her pain. So in her instance, we know that it's super important for her to eat organic, and it's super important for her to control inflammation. So isn't that amazing? And I think people don't know that. They don't know.
Absolutely. I want to go back real quick to the slide action steps on to increase glutathione. You mentioned a number of things: sulfur-rich foods, cruciferous vegetables, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin C, milk thistle, exercise, things like that. On liposomal glutathione, I'm wondering if you think there's any issue of like negative feedback loops, where if you take the end product as opposed to precursors. So some of the things you mentioned, like sulfur-rich foods, selenium, vitamin C, these are cofactors and precursors that allow your body to make the amount of glutathione that it wants to make. But then to take the end product is a little bit different. And I'm not saying it's inherently bad, but I'm wondering if you perceive there to be more of a potential for side effects when you do something like that, or down-regulating the body's own production of glutathione, or anything along those lines.
Absolutely. You should never be cavalier when you're replacing. So if you give a substrate, you can sometimes get that negative inhibition. So there is that worry. And I would say I would utilize that when someone has significant mutations and significant disease. And so if you've got modest mutations and modest symptoms, and maybe they're doing a dose periodically, or they're doing a single dose rather than a double dose, so gentle support. But if they've got significant mutations, I found most people in those instances alone, and I wouldn't be cavalier, and you'd want to be following and tracking them. And I tell people, even if I pulse dose in some methylfolate, I'm like, you can't be on this forever, and you need to be followed continually, and whether that's once a year, twice a year, 3 or 4 times a year, depending on what their clinical kind of predisposition is. So you bring up a good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that. I've always been curious, because some people are very cavalier about it and kind of say, oh, the more glutathione, the better. Just, keep pumping in glutathione in your body, even if you're already healthy, more is better. And knowing what I know about human physiology, that seems to rarely be the case with anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. You have to be very careful. And that's why in the beginning I said, focus on those epigenetics, but be cognizant that if someone's chronically ill, that mutated gene is likely expressing, and then support it in a sensible fashion. So let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
So we kind of reviewed detox, and unfortunately, we're all going to be exposed, and you can avoid, but there's going to be some things. So that's the importance of it being. The main thing about us being superhuman is that unfortunately, all these toxins more readily take out our mitochondria, because our mitochondrial DNA is not protected in histones, and that's what can lead to fatigue, and that's what can lead to the disease processes. So that's why I focused on this, because optimize that, and you certainly will have much higher levels of energy than those who aren't focused on eliminating oxidative stress by limiting inflammation and removing those triggers. So the second part to this is hormone metabolism. I'm going to do this in a general sort of way, and just to let our listeners know that our hormones come from cholesterol, and you can actually have too low of cholesterol. From cholesterol channels over and through multiple steps. Testosterone is produced in all of us, and testosterone can go one of two ways. It can convert over to DHT, and DHT is like testosterone. It's a super testosterone, or it's on the testosterone on steroids. So that's what, think of muscly men like The Rock, But unfortunately, DHT makes you bald, or too much of it. And so think of The Rock. He's bald and muscular. So that's someone who's taking the testosterone, converting it over very quickly. And then testosterone can also be forwarded to estradiol, and that testosterone to estradiol. Think about if we give someone testosterone and they do that quickly, and it's a man, well, you can feminize them and give them boobs or man boobs. And so you have to be really mindful of knowing which way that goes. And once estradiol is formed, there's a few things that can happen. The estradiol can be converted. Actually, it can form into 4 different byproducts, and they're hydroxyestrogens. 2 is considered the good estrogen. 4 is the bad and can potentially have deleterious effects on us. And 16 is intermediate. It was thought to be bad. It's not really certain. So again, to highlight, cholesterol is needed to make all your sex hormones. We're predominantly going to focus on testosterone and its conversion either to DHT or estradiol. And then we'll also talk about taking that estradiol and converting it to hydroxyestrogen, and then to excrete it out of the body as well. So there's lots of key genes, and there's lots of numbers that may be difficult to relay. And so we'll start with the testosterone to DHT is actually converted by the gene is SRD5A2. Not important to know. It's also known as 5-alpha reductase. And remember, if someone is converting quickly, so if a man is converting quickly and I give him testosterone, I can make them balder. So you have to be careful. Same with a woman. So some women have female pattern or male pattern baldness, and it can convert quickly. So what can help a person out? What can we do naturally to decrease that conversion? And things that are high in lycopene. And so lycopene, many of you may know, is high in tomatoes, but it's the brightly red colored foods. So tomatoes, watermelons, even carrots and papaya and mangoes. And that'll block that conversion. So you don't have to. Sometimes I say I would never prescribe hormones without knowing the genetics, but you want to just be cautious because you can actually measure testosterone and DHT. And then there are medications. So we all know about Rogaine or minoxidil. It's called the generic name finasteride. So I'm not suggesting that the listeners utilize that, but just to know. And then the other important gene for hormone metabolism is...
I just want to comment really quick. I had never heard that about natural methods to decrease conversion of testosterone to DHT. That's a great tip.
Yeah, to decrease. Yeah. So that was something I found specifically while I was researching for our talk today. So I didn't know that either. So I don't...
That makes me feel a little bit better about not knowing it then.
No, I didn't know it either. And I suspect, though, it's going to be a mild decrease in conversion, not as strong as the full-out medication.
Right.
The next gene that converts testosterone to estradiol, again, the numbers and letters are not important, but for thoroughness sake, CYP19A1 is the name of the gene, and it governs aromatase. So people have heard of aromatase, so testosterone to estradiol. So again, the importance of this is, what if I give a man testosterone and he converts rather quickly as a mutation that upregulates that? Well, the last thing you want to do is give him moobs or man boobs. And in women, if it's converting quickly and they can't clear it, potentially increasing estrogen levels to the point of, that can put them unsafe. And you worry about, am I inducing, putting them in a situation that makes them so estrogen dominant? You think about cancers, of course. How about, so natural things that increase that conversion to estrogen? So think about an unhealthy person. So someone who has excess adipose or fat tissue, someone who's stressed out, someone who has prediabetes or insulin resistance, someone's completely inflamed, and then ironically zinc deficiency. So that increases it. And so a natural way to increase testosterone, make sure people are zinc replete, so it slows that conversion. And there are some others as well, but the main ones being that, focusing on an uninflamed, healthy lifestyle that is nutrient replete. So anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's great. I was looking at your next slide here on decreasing conversion of testosterone to estradiol. And I love how on the list smoking is listed, and then in parentheses it says not recommended. You should have maybe also put not recommended next to dioxin too.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, definitely. I have to change that up. So dioxin is a terrible toxin. I think Agent Orange, right? So we don't recommend that. But just to know,
just to be clear, we're not saying start smoking cigarettes in order to improve your hormones.
Yeah. So I kind of highlighted the ones that I thought were more important. So flaxseed. So a lot of people, when they make smoothies, will add flaxseed, and it does help decrease that conversion. And flavonoids, green tea. So anastrozole. So if you're treating men and they have that fast conversion, so say you don't know their genetics, you're going to very quickly measure. And if they have that fast conversion and the estradiol levels go up, you can block that conversion by giving gentle pulse dosing of anastrozole, which blocks that. So if needed, so you're not going to use it in everyone. You're going to want to follow it. So either their genetics or their labs or both. So you know which way it's going. So you want to follow everyone closely. You don't want people on hormone replacement where they're cavalierly not being followed. So that's dangerous. So that leads me to a case. So I have a funny story. I'll do it in a minute or so here. So I was ironically attending a hormone conference in February when we last could travel. And I waited at the car rental place for almost 2 hours without a light. I arrived and they had 0 cars in the shop. So I was renting in Beverly Hills and happened to be there. What a nice location. And I happened to be able to talk to everyone who came in there. I'm pretty extroverted and enjoy it. And this guy came in, I feel like I'm sometimes a hairdresser or a bartender. People always, even though I'm not acting as their doctor, I always get the story. And you'll see why I have a picture of a Maserati up here in a minute. And so this gentleman came in and he told me his long-winded story of how he's trying to get in shape for like his 30th anniversary or 30th reunion for high school, and that he was put on hormone replacement and he developed man boobs and he gained weight around the middle. And so that is that someone wasn't following, so he was definitely converting that testosterone quickly to estrogen. Thank goodness he wasn't doing it to DHT because he didn't lose his hair. And the outcome of that 2-hour wait was that I had an ordinary small fun convertible rented just to enjoy the California sun. It was out in California, and they ended up upgrading me to a Maserati Levante, and it was super, super fun. So just tying it back in of why I have that picture, but it's also a very macho car. So lots of speed. So it's great to open up, but that's why you should be careful. And now onto the estrogen metabolism. Again, I want to kind of just focus on a couple things, is that estrogens, remember, can be broken down to 2, 4, or 16 hydroxy estrogen, 2 being good, 4 being considered bad or potentially harmful. And then when we look at what increases the conversion of estrogen to 2-hydroxy, and it's some of the same things that help with stopping the testosterone and estrogen. So your flaxseed, but it's also your cruciferous vegetables. And then they've taken the active compounds out of cruciferous vegetables, and those are I3C and DIM, and you can give them in supplemental form. So if someone is not able to do this on their own, probably besides the diet lifestyle, that's probably one of the most important supplements that will support someone if they don't detoxify their estrogen well, but want to be on estrogen for brain health and maybe are at risk for having memory loss and so forth. But other things on the list, soy. I'm not a big fan of soy unless it's completely organic and not genetically modified. Caffeine, rosemary, exercise, and even thyroxine. So that's thyroid hormone. So if you're hypothyroid, you're not going to clear your estrogen. So making sure your thyroid function is optimized, and you can do that diet and lifestyle. And then if that doesn't cut it, and you have the discussion, maybe even a replacement, depending on what your scenario is. So think about the things that decrease that conversion of estrogen to the 2-hydroxyestrogen. Think about all the bad things we do. So excess sugar, and then excess omega-6 fatty acids. And that is typically found in vegetable oils, or think of just processed foods. So sugar, processed foods, and then the birth control pill of all things. And so I'm not knocking it. And for many young women, that might be the right choice, but you have to be mindful of that and support the nutrient depletions that it induces. And one of the other ones was a heartburn medication, cimetidine. So not to be confused with ranitidine, which they recently found causes cancers, and they've yanked off the market. So you just want to know all these things. And then, so what increases or decreases? So we talked about what increases the conversion to good estrogen. And I always say the way to remember is a healthy lifestyle. And then how about what increases or decreases the conversion to the 4-hydroxy, which is considered the bad. And so things that I would focus on are bioflavonoids or grapefruit. And then things that increase that conversion to bad is exposure to toxins. So PCBs and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So all the environmental exposures. So basically, if you support a healthy lifestyle, you should be able to detoxify these. And if you know your Gen X, even better. And the last thing I'll say is someone who has gone from estrogen and then broken down the estrogen into the hydroxys, and you need to excrete it further. And that's done by a gene called COMT. And COMT is a comp gene. It governs dopamine, but not only dopamine breakdown into norepinephrine and then epinephrine, but also estrogen. And one of the key things to support that is glutathione. So glutathione is not only important for your oxidative stress, but for estrogen clearance. So two ways it's important: reducing our oxidative stress and metabolizing our estrogen. And you want to measure. So everyone gets measured. I do serum labs to start. You can look at saliva. Saliva is better if you're replacing with creams. And then I always look at the urinary metabolites. I'm measuring 2, 4, and 16 in everyone who's on replacement at least 1 to 2 times a year until we know that they're stable, then once a year. And there are companies that do this. Genova does it. Their test is called Astronics. Another company, Precision Analytical, does the Dutch test, which also does that. So that was a summary of the hormones. I'm hoping to have time for the last case. BDNF, I just brought it up because BDNF is brain-derived neurotropic factor, because that is what is released and allows us to have brain elasticity. So elasticity for our nerve cells. And believe it or not, you have a gene that governs its formation. And then there are diet and lifestyle. So if someone has the highest expression, then they're going to produce the most if that gene's actually expressing and they're living a healthy lifestyle. So what kinds of things in our lifestyle increase? So exercise, and actually the sustained production was found in moderate intensity aerobic was sustained production BDNF over strength training. Now I always say anyone over 40 definitely needs the strength training to keep up the muscle tone. Deep sleep, meditation, just sunlight, exposure to sunlight, intermittent fasting, another vote for intermittent fasting, and even the ketogenic diet. And I'm a big fan of an alkaline ketogenic diet just for clearance of toxins. And then there are a whole host of supplements, and probably some of the we'll go over just the top 3 or 4 here is coffee fruit extract, There's lion's mane. A lot of people supplement in DHA. And then I'd say I'd even be a big fan because we know that stress can reduce beta-NF. So one of my favorite herbs to make you resilient to stress is rhodiola, so adaptogenic herbs. So we're just going to touch upon that.
I like that you mentioned those three. I have a new brain formula that's coming to the market in about 3 weeks, and those are literally they're 3 of the 19 ingredients. But I was going to say they're the 3 top ingredients, but only that's true of lion's mane and rhodiola. And then neurofactor, which is a specific extract of coffee fruit extract.
Yeah.
It's all in there. So as a number of these other things like saffron. So yeah, nice to hear you verify that.
Yeah, no, I mean, isn't it great? I mean, I just keep telling people if you need to supplement, you do, but healthy diet and lifestyle. So what decreases it? So stress, being socially isolated, and sugar. So the 3 S's. And I know we only have a couple minutes, but I really, really want to wrap it up. So I had a case come in, a young lady in her late 40s, came in with fatigue, Hashimoto's, and then went on to develop infertility, endometriosis, PMS, gallbladder disease, migraines that cause a loss of her speech, weight gain, and then had a second mystery illness, severe right upper quadrant pain, found to have liver enzymes that were more than 10 times normal. Actually, let me think about this. 20 times normal. So normal is like in the teens. And so up at the 250 range, and really felt unwell. And here's the SNPs that were wrong or missing. So for detox, this person had SOD, was homozygous. So 2 mutations. And then for PON1 homozygous, 0 copies of both of the 2 glutathione genes, and then 1 copy was deleted in the third. Fortunately, had optimal BDNF. So what that tells me is that person's extremely prone to stress. And this person also had poor conversion of estrogen to favorable estrogen, and a fast conversion to the bad estrogen. So you had to be really careful. And so that person was me. So as I was sitting there in a celebratory vacation that me and my family almost took, and I'm in liver failure, thinking, so this is how it ends. You know, I have 2 small kids that I've done everything to live a healthy life and finally overcome all these symptoms. And now they think I'm having liver failure from autoimmune disease. And it was strictly related to such terrible detoxification. And so now I've achieved those dreams, not only being a doctor, a mother, a wife, an international speaker, a mentor, and a small business owner. And I speak kind of all through lots of summits, but that's the caution. I'd say if you have significant symptoms, you want to really be looking at the whole picture. And I hope everyone's enjoyed my talk.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Rajka, thank you so much. This was absolutely awesome. This was just an amazing rundown of some of the top genes that influence energy levels, brain function, hormones, and you did it masterfully in a very brief period of time, along with very clear, practical recommendations on how to optimize the function of those genes. Phenomenal. Thank you so much. This was really a blast. It was brilliant stuff. For people interested in contacting you, working with you, what's the best place to do that?
Probably head over to my website, drrajka.com, drrajka.com. People can book a discovery call, see if it's a good fit, or find my high performance group called High Performance Doctor for Busy, Motivated Women on Facebook, and join me there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, my friend. Really a pleasure, and thank you. It was really nice to connect with you again, and I'm impressed as always with your amazing knowledge.
Oh, you're very welcome. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next